"Security! Get this homeless-looking black man out of my lounge before he steals something." Richard Morrison's voice carried across the Delta Sky Club like a bullwhip. The businessman stood blocking the entrance, his $4,000 suit and Rolex Submariner practically radiating entitlement as he pointed at the man in jeans and a worn leather jacket trying to enter behind him. Captain James Mitchell, 42 years old, 20 years with Delta Airlines, over 12,000 flight hours logged, stood frozen with his boarding pass and Sky Club membership card in hand, watching this stranger decide he didn't belong in the airport lounge based purely on how he looked. The worn leather jacket was his father's, Air Force pilot, Vietnam veteran. Died when James was 16. The jeans were comfortable for the long drive to the airport. The simple black t-shirt was clean and wrinkle-free. None of it screamed airline captain, but all of it was perfectly acceptable attire for the lounge. None of it should have mattered. But to Richard Morrison, standing there like he owned the entire airport, James's appearance was all he needed to see. Black man, casual clothes, clearly doesn't belong among first-class passengers and business travelers who look the right way. Have you ever been judged so completely that someone tried to remove you from a place you had every right to be? The Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport Delta Sky Club was packed with Friday afternoon travelers. Business executives hunched over laptops, families sprawled across leather seats, solo travelers nursed drinks at the bar. All of them now turned to watch this confrontation unfold in real time. Richard Morrison had been riding high on adrenaline and self-importance since his morning meetings in New York. 3 deals closed. $4.7 million in commissions coming his way. Flying back to Atlanta first class because he deserved it. And now this person, this clearly inappropriate person, was trying to access the exclusive lounge that Richard considered his territory. "Excuse me," James said quietly, his voice carrying the forced calm of someone who'd experienced this before. "I have a valid membership card and I'm checking in for my flight. I have every right to be here." "I don't care what card you have," Richard snapped, stepping closer into James's personal space. "Those cards are easy to fake. You don't belong in this lounge. Look at yourself. Look at how you're dressed. This is a first-class facility for business professionals, not a homeless shelter." A young blonde woman working the reception desk, Sarah Mitchell, no relation, looked between the two men with growing alarm. She'd been trained for difficult situations, but this was escalating faster than she knew how to handle. "Sir," Sarah addressed Richard carefully, "this gentleman is trying to check in. If he has valid credentials—" "I'm telling you, his credentials are fake," Richard interrupted, not even looking at her. "I know people. I've been flying first class for 15 years. I know who belongs in these lounges and who doesn't. And this guy?" He gestured dismissively at James. "He clearly doesn't belong." James pulled out his Sky Club membership card, Diamond Medallion status, highest tier Delta offered, and placed it on the reception desk. "As I said, I have a valid membership. I've had it for 8 years. I'd like to check in, please." Richard snatched the card from the desk before Sarah could even look at it, examining it like a detective studying evidence. "This has to be fake. These cards don't just give these to anyone. You probably printed this off the internet." "Sir, that's my property," James said, his voice still controlled but with steel underneath. "Please return it." "I'll return it to airport security when they arrest you for trespassing and fraud," Richard replied, pocketing the card. "Sarah, I'm a Platinum Medallion member myself. I'm filing a formal complaint about your security protocols allowing suspicious individuals access to this facility. And I'm calling security right now." He pulled out his phone and began dialing, his performance clearly for the benefit of the watching crowd. Several business travelers were nodding approvingly. Others looked uncomfortable, but stayed silent. A few had phones out, recording. One elderly black woman sitting near the entrance stood up, her face tight with recognition of what she was witnessing. "Young man, don't let him do this to you. That's your card. You have every right—" "Ma'am, stay out of this," Richard snapped at her. "Unless you want to be removed too for causing a disturbance." The elderly woman's companion, also black, stood as well. "We've been Diamond Medallion members for 20 years. We know what belongs in this lounge looks like, and it looks like him." He pointed at James. "I'm sure you do," Richard said with dripping condescension. "But that doesn't change the fact that this man is clearly trying to scam his way into a facility he can't afford. Security is on the way. They'll sort this out." James stood perfectly still, a skill he'd learned over 20 years of dealing with passengers, difficult situations, and the occasional person who couldn't believe a black man could be an airline captain. His hands remained visible and non-threatening. His voice stayed calm and professional. Every bit of his training and experience went into not escalating a situation that this stranger had created out of pure prejudice. "Sir," James said to Richard directly, "I'm asking you one final time to return my membership card. I have a flight to catch and I'd like to access the lounge I've paid for and have every legal right to use." "And I'm telling you that's not happening," Richard replied. "You can wait right here for security to escort you out. Maybe they'll be generous and just ban you from the airport instead of pressing charges for fraud and trespassing." Sarah, the receptionist, was frantically typing on her computer, pulling up James's membership information, her eyes widening as she read what appeared on her screen. "Sir, Mr. Morrison, I think there might be—" "I don't care what your computer says," Richard interrupted. "Computers can be hacked. Information can be falsified. I'm using common sense here. Look at him. Does he look like someone who belongs in a first-class lounge?" A younger white man in his 30s, sitting near the bar with his laptop, finally spoke up. "Dude, you're being ridiculous. Just let the guy check in. You're not the lounge police." "Mind your own business," Richard shot back. "When you've been flying as long as I have, when you've earned your status the way I have, then you can have an opinion about lounge security." Airport security officer Marcus Thompson arrived, drawn by Sarah's panicked call. He was a large black man in his 50s who'd worked at Hartsfield-Jackson for 12 years and had seen every kind of situation imaginable. But the look on his face when he assessed the scene suggested he knew exactly what kind of situation this was. "What's the problem here?" Marcus asked, his voice professionally neutral. Richard immediately launched into his prepared narrative. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man is trying to gain access to the Sky Club with fake credentials. I've been observing him, and I'm certain he's running some kind of scam. He doesn't belong here. Just look at him. I'm requesting that he be removed from the airport immediately and charged with trespassing and fraud." Marcus turned to James. "Sir, do you have identification and your boarding credentials?" "My identification is in my bag," James said calmly. "My Sky Club membership card is in this gentleman's pocket because he took it from me, and my boarding pass is right here." He held up his phone, showing his mobile boarding pass on the Delta app. Marcus's eyes flicked to the screen, then widened almost imperceptibly. "May I see that more closely, sir?" James handed over his phone. Marcus studied the boarding pass carefully, his professional mask slipping for just a moment as he processed what he was seeing. "Mr. Morrison," Marcus said slowly, "I'm going to need you to return this gentleman's membership card immediately." "Absolutely not," Richard replied. "That card is evidence of fraud. I'm not returning it until you've arrested him and—" "Sir," Marcus interrupted, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Return the card, now." Something in Marcus's tone made Richard hesitate. He pulled out James's Sky Club card and handed it to Marcus, rather than returning it directly to James, a final petty gesture of control. Marcus examined the card, then looked at James's boarding pass again on the phone. Then he did something unexpected. He started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a deep, genuine laugh that made several people in the lounge look over with confusion. "Is something funny, officer?" Richard demanded. "Because I fail to see the humor in airport security being compromised by fraudsters." Marcus wiped his eyes, his laughter subsiding into an enormous grin. "Oh, there's humor here, sir. Trust me, there's definitely humor." He handed James's phone and membership card back to him with obvious respect. "Captain Mitchell, my sincere apologies for this situation. Please go ahead and check in. I'll handle things here." The word "captain" hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Richard's confident expression flickered. "Captain? What are you talking about? He's not a—" "Captain James Mitchell," Marcus said, his voice now loud enough for the entire lounge to hear clearly. "Delta Airlines, Senior Captain, Boeing 777 international routes, 20 years of service, over 12,000 flight hours. One of the most experienced pilots in Delta's entire fleet. The color drained from Richard's face like someone had opened a tap. That's not possible. He doesn't look like... Doesn't look like what, sir? Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. A pilot? Or doesn't look like what you think a pilot should look like? Richard's mouth opened and closed without sound. Around the lounge, phones were coming out faster now. Someone whispered, "Oh shit," loud enough for everyone to hear. The elderly black woman who'd stood up for James was smiling with grim satisfaction. James stood perfectly still, waiting to see how this would play out. He'd been through versions of this before. Passengers who didn't believe he was the captain, flight attendants who mistook him for ground crew, gate agents who questioned his credentials. But this was the first time someone had tried to have him physically removed from an airport facility. Sarah, the receptionist, finally found her voice. "Captain Mitchell, I'm so terribly sorry. Your check-in is complete. Please, go right in. Can I get you anything? A drink? Food? Anything at all?" "I'm fine. Thank you," James said quietly. He looked at Richard Morrison, who was now visibly sweating despite the cool airport air conditioning. "I'd like my membership card back, please. The actual physical card, not just handed to security." Marcus extended the card toward James with visible respect. James took it and put it carefully back in his wallet, then looked directly at Richard. "I'm Captain James Mitchell. I'll be flying Delta Flight 1247 to Los Angeles, departing from Gate B-17 at 4:30 p.m. That's the flight you're on, Mr. Morrison. I saw your boarding pass when you waved it around earlier showing off your first-class seat." Richard's face went from white to green. You're not, that can't be. "I am your pilot today," James said, his voice carrying across the now silent lounge. "The man you just tried to have arrested for trespassing is the person who will be flying your plane across the country at 35,000 feet. The man you accused of being a homeless fraudster is responsible for your safety for the next 4.5 hours. The silence in the lounge was deafening. Everyone was staring at Richard, who looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. "I'm going to go prepare for the flight now," James continued. "I take my responsibilities very seriously. Every passenger on that plane, including you, Mr. Morrison, will receive the same professional service and safe transport that I've provided to hundreds of thousands of passengers over my 20-year career. Despite how you've treated me, despite your assumptions about who I am based on my appearance, I will do my job with excellence. Because that's what professionals do." He turned to Marcus. "Thank you for your assistance, Officer Thompson." "Anytime, Captain Mitchell. Have a safe flight." James walked past Richard into the lounge, his worn leather jacket and comfortable jeans suddenly looking exactly like what they were. An experienced pilot's choice for comfort before a long flight, not a statement about his worth or capabilities. Richard stood rooted to the spot, his expensive suit and watch suddenly meaningless accessories on a man who just publicly humiliated himself through his own prejudice. "Mr. Morrison," Marcus said quietly, "I'm going to need to file an incident report about this situation. You attempted to have a Delta Airlines captain removed from an airport facility based on his appearance. You took his property without permission. You made accusations of fraud without any evidence. Delta's going to want to review your platinum medallion status after this." "But I didn't know," Richard whispered. "How was I supposed to know he was a pilot? He didn't look like..." "Like what?" Marcus asked. "Finish that sentence, sir. Tell me what you think pilots are supposed to look like." Richard couldn't answer. His throat worked, but no words came out. "That's what I thought," Marcus said. "You can check in now if you want, but I'd think very carefully about whether you really want to board that flight, because you just insulted and tried to humiliate the man who's responsible for your safety today. Personally, I'd find a different flight, but that's just me." Richard stumbled toward the reception desk on shaking legs. Sarah checked him in with icy professionalism, her earlier friendliness completely gone. She'd seen exactly what kind of person he was, and her contempt was visible in every clipped word. Inside the lounge, James headed straight for the quiet corner where he always prepared for flights. He pulled out his iPad with the flight plan, his checklist, his weather reports. The familiar routine of pre-flight preparation helped steady his breathing and refocus his mind on what mattered, getting 247 passengers safely from Atlanta to Los Angeles. But his hands were shaking slightly, not from fear or anger, but from the adrenaline crash that came after being publicly humiliated and having to maintain perfect composure throughout. 20 years of flying, thousands of hours of command experience, and he still couldn't quite armor himself against the gut punch of racism delivered so casually by a stranger who felt entitled to judge him. "Captain Mitchell?" A quiet voice interrupted his thoughts. James looked up to see the elderly black woman who'd stood up for him earlier. She was probably in her 70s, elegant in her traveling clothes, her face kind but showing the weight of witnessing too many moments like this. "I'm Dorothy Williams," she said. "I wanted to thank you for handling that with such grace. I know that couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," James admitted, "but I've had practice." "I'm sure you have," Dorothy said sadly. "My husband was a Tuskegee Airman. He faced men like that his entire career, people who couldn't believe a black man belonged in a cockpit. He would have been proud of how you handled yourself today." James felt his throat tighten. "Thank you. That means more than you know. My husband used to say that every time he flew, every time he brought passengers home safely, he was proving those people wrong without having to say a word. He said excellence was the best revenge." "Sounds like a wise man." "He was." Dorothy smiled. "I'm on your flight today, 4A, first class. I feel very safe knowing you're our captain." After she left, James sat with his flight materials, trying to refocus his mind completely on the task ahead. Pre-flight checks, weather systems, crew coordination, passenger safety, the weight of responsibility that came with every single flight. His phone buzzed. Text from his co-pilot, First Officer Andrea Stevens. "Just heard what happened in the Sky Club. You okay?" James typed back, "I'm fine. Ready for the flight. See you at the gate." Another text, this one from Marcus Thompson. "Captain, FYI, incident is being reviewed by Delta Management and TSA. Mr. Morrison's going to face some consequences. Also, that whole thing was recorded by multiple people. It's already spreading on social media. Thought you should know." James closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Of course it was on social media. Of course this private humiliation was about to become public entertainment. He could already imagine the comments, the arguments, the people who would defend Richard's actions or question James's version of events. But he also knew what would happen. The truth would come out. His credentials were public record. His 20 years of safe flights spoke for themselves. And Richard Morrison would learn that actions have consequences when you try to humiliate someone with the assumption that they're powerless. James gathered his materials and headed for the gate, ready to do his job with the same excellence he brought to every flight, regardless of who appreciated it or understood it or tried to deny he was capable of it. Behind him, Richard Morrison sat alone at the bar in the Sky Club, drinking scotch with shaking hands, his phone lighting up with furious texts from his wife, who'd just seen a video of him trying to have a black pilot removed from the airport lounge. His perfect day of closed deals and first-class travel was disintegrating into public shame and professional consequences he was only beginning to understand. The video was going viral. And Delta pilot and airport racism were trending. Richard's face was being screen captured and shared across every platform. His employer was being tagged. His behavior was being dissected by millions of people who could clearly see what he'd done and why he'd done it. And in 4 hours, Richard Morrison would have to decide whether to board Flight 1247 and spend 4.5 hours in a plane flown by the man he'd tried to destroy with his casual racism. Justice was about to be served at 35,000 feet. At Gate B-17, Captain James Mitchell checked in with the gate agent and headed down the jetway to begin his pre-flight inspection. The Boeing 777 waited, a marvel of engineering that he'd guide across the country with the same skill and professionalism he brought to every flight for 20 years. He just wished one time, just once, he could do his job without someone deciding he didn't belong based on nothing but the color of his skin. Gate B-17 bustled with the usual pre-boarding chaos. Business travelers jockeyed for position near the gate agent's desk. Families corralled restless children. Solo passengers scrolled phones while waiting for their boarding group to be called. First Officer Andrea Stevens was already in the cockpit running preliminary checks when James climbed aboard. She looked up with concern etched across her face. "Captain, I heard what happened. Are you sure you're okay to fly?" "I'm fine, Andrea," James said, settling into the left seat and beginning his own checklist. "Nothing I haven't dealt with before. Let's focus on getting these passengers to Los Angeles safely." "I saw the video," Andrea continued. "It's everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Everyone's talking about it." James's hands paused over the instruments. "The video shows what happened?" "Everything. That businessman accusing you, taking your card, calling security, then security calling you captain in his face when he realized. It's got like 2 million views already and climbing. Comments are, 'Well, they're on your side if that helps.'" It didn't help, not really. James had never wanted to be viral video fodder, a symbol of racism in America, a teaching moment for social media. He just wanted to fly planes. But he nodded and continued his pre-flight routine, the familiar sequence of checks and procedures grounding him. Lead Flight Attendant Denise Washington appeared in the cockpit doorway. She was a veteran of 18 years, had flown with James dozens of times, and her expression told him she'd heard everything. "Captain, heads up. Mr. Morrison from the Sky Club incident just boarded. He's in 2B, first class. Looks like he's going to be sick. Is he going to be a problem?" James asked, his focus never leaving his instruments. "Hard to say." He went straight to his seat without making eye contact with anyone. But the passengers around him definitely recognize him from the video. "I've already got my crew briefed to watch for any issues. Keep me informed. Any hint of a disturbance and we offload him before departure." "Understood, Captain." The boarding process continued. Passengers filled the massive 777, filing past the cockpit, many glancing in with the usual mixture of curiosity and nervous energy that came with commercial flight. A few recognized James from the video that was apparently circulating everywhere, their expressions shifting from surprise to support. Dorothy Williams paused at the cockpit door. "Captain Mitchell, thank you for getting us home safely today." "That's my job, ma'am. Enjoy your flight." The man behind Dorothy spoke up too. "Captain, I just want to say I saw what happened. That was handled with incredible professionalism. Thank you for not letting that ignorance affect your work." More passengers chimed in as they passed. Words of support, expressions of gratitude, apologies on behalf of Richard Morrison and everyone like him. James accepted it all with grace. But inside he felt the weight of being turned into a symbol when he just wanted to be a pilot doing his job. In seat 2B, Richard Morrison sat rigid with his seatbelt fastened, staring straight ahead at the bulkhead. The woman in 2A next to him had her phone out, clearly watching the video that Richard had hoped wouldn't follow him onto the plane. "I can't believe you're actually flying on this plane," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "After what you did to the captain, I'd be mortified." Richard didn't respond. His hands gripped the armrests with white-knuckled intensity. Behind him in 4A, Dorothy Williams settled into her seat with a satisfied smile. Justice had many forms, and watching Richard Morrison squirm for the next 4.5 hours while Captain Mitchell flew them all safely across the country felt like poetic justice indeed. The boarding process completed. Gate agent Sarah Kim made the final announcement and closed the aircraft door with a solid thunk that always signaled the point of no return. In the cockpit, James received clearance for pushback. Delta 1247 ready for pushback, gate B-17. Delta 1247, cleared to push. The familiar sensation of the aircraft being pushed backward from the gate, the start of another flight, another opportunity to do what he loved and did better than almost anyone in the industry. James had flown in combat zones, through typhoons with engine failures and medical emergencies. He'd brought planes home safely through situations that would terrify most people. This would be a routine flight, despite the extraordinary circumstances that preceded it. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain James Mitchell speaking from the flight deck." His voice filled the cabin through the PA system. calm and authoritative. On behalf of First Officer Stevens and the entire crew, welcome aboard Delta Flight 1247 with service to Los Angeles. Our flight time today will be approximately 4 hours and 37 minutes. In 2B, Richard Morrison felt every word like a physical blow. That voice, so professional, so competent, so utterly in command, belonged to the man he'd tried to have arrested less than an hour ago. We'll be cruising at 37,000 feet, James continued. Current weather in Los Angeles is clear with temperatures in the mid-70s. We expect a smooth flight with some light turbulence over the Rockies. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight. The 777 pushed back from the gate, taxied to the runway, and James brought the massive aircraft to life. The engines spooled up with their characteristic roar. The acceleration down the runway pressed everyone back in their seats. And then the moment James never tired of. Rotation, the nose lifting, the wheels leaving the ground, the transition from earthbound machine to flying marvel of human engineering. Atlanta fell away beneath them. The 777 climbed through the afternoon sky, banking west toward Los Angeles, carrying 247 passengers who trusted their lives to the skill of pilots they'd never met. Except today, dozens of those passengers knew exactly who their pilot was. The video had reached critical mass. News outlets were picking up the story. Delta pilot faces racism in airport lounge headlines were spreading across the internet. James Mitchell was becoming famous for something that had nothing to do with his 2 decades of flying excellence. 30 minutes into the flight, Denise appeared in the cockpit doorway again. "Captain, situation update. Mr. Morrison hasn't moved from his seat. Won't eat or drink. Just sitting there looking like he's facing a firing squad. Several passengers have been giving him dirty looks. One guy in 3C called him a racist asshole when Morrison tried to use the bathroom. I shut that down, but the tension in first class is pretty thick. Any safety concerns?" "Not yet. But the entire plane knows what he did. You're kind of a hero right now. People keep asking the crew to pass messages thanking you for your professionalism." James exchanged a glance with Andrea, who was shaking her head in amazement. "Just keep things calm," James said. "Last thing we need is a disturbance at altitude." 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over Kansas, James received a radio call from Delta Operations. "Delta 1247, operations on frequency. 1247, go ahead. Captain Mitchell, be advised you're going to have company when you land. Media has gotten wind of the incident at Hartsfield-Jackson. We've got crews requesting permission to film your arrival. Corporate Communications wants to connect with you after landing. Also, we're getting calls from passengers on your flight sending messages of support." James rubbed his temples. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of. "Copy that, operations. I'm focused on flying right now. We can deal with media after we're on the ground." "Understood, Captain. Also, and this is unofficial, the CEO's office called. Mr. Bastian wants to speak with you personally when you're available. Says to tell you the company stands behind you 100%. That was something, at least. Ed Bastian, Delta's CEO, was known for supporting his employees. But James couldn't think about any of that now. He had a plane to fly. 3 hours in, crossing into Nevada airspace, Denise brought James an unusual request. "Captain, I have a situation. Sort of. Dorothy Williams in 4A would like permission to speak with you if you have a moment. She says it's important, and she promises it won't take long." James frowned. Passengers almost never came to the cockpit during flight, especially since 9/11. But something in Denise's expression suggested this was worth it. "Send her up." Dorothy Williams appeared in the cockpit doorway moments later. James swiveled in his seat to face her while Andrea monitored the flight. "Mrs. Williams, what can I do for you?" "Captain, I'm sorry to bother you while you're working, but I wanted you to see something." She held up her phone showing a news article. "This just posted 15 minutes ago." The headline read, "Businessman caught on video trying to remove black pilot from airport lounge loses his job." James read the article quickly. Richard Morrison, senior vice president at Morrison Financial Group, had been terminated effective immediately after video of his behavior went viral. The company released a statement. "Morrison Financial Group has zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior. The actions displayed in today's video do not reflect our values. Mr. Morrison's employment has been terminated, and we are conducting a full review of our diversity and inclusion practices. I thought you'd want to know, Dorothy said gently. Actions have consequences. That man tried to humiliate you, and instead he destroyed his own career. James didn't know how to feel. Relief? Satisfaction? Guilt that someone lost their job because of him? No, not because of him. Because of their own choices and prejudice. Thank you for showing me, Mrs. Williams. My husband always said that the truth has a way of coming out. That man's truth came out today, and so did yours. The whole world is seeing your professionalism, your grace, your competence. That matters. After Dorothy left, James sat in the left seat staring out at the endless sky. Somewhere below them, Richard Morrison sat in 2B knowing his entire life had just imploded. Job gone. Video seen by millions. Face associated forever with airport racism and spectacular public humiliation. And James was still flying the plane, still doing his job, still responsible for 247 lives regardless of drama or videos or the racism that had tried to deny he was capable of this. Captain, we're beginning our descent, Andrea said gently. James snapped back to full focus. The approach to Los Angeles required his complete attention. Weather was clear, but LAX was one of the busiest airports in the world. Every landing demanded respect and total concentration. Roger that. LAX approached Delta 1247 with information Romeo descending to 11,000. The familiar dance of approach, descent, configuration changes. Flaps extending, landing gear deploying. The massive 777 settling toward the runway with the grace of a bird coming home to roost. James greased the landing, the smoothest touchdown he'd managed in weeks. The kind of landing where passengers barely felt the wheels touch down. Applause broke out in the cabin, unusual for routine flights, but this flight was anything but routine. Delta 1247, exit taxiway Mike, contact ground on a 121.9. Taxiway Mike, 121.9, Delta 1247. They taxied to the gate, the flight complete, all passengers safe. The job done with the same excellence James brought to every flight regardless of the circumstances surrounding it. As the jetway connected and the door opened, Denise's voice came over the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Mitchell and First Officer Stevens have brought us safely to Los Angeles. On behalf of the entire crew, thank you for flying Delta. The first-class passengers deplaned first. Richard Morrison moved like a ghost, keeping his head down, avoiding eye contact, trying to disappear into the crowd. But other passengers recognized him and weren't so kind. That's him. That's the racist from the video. Can't believe he actually took this flight. Guess he's got a lot to think about during his new unemployment. Richard fled into the terminal without looking back. Dorothy Williams paused at the cockpit door on her way out. Captain Mitchell, it was an honor flying with you today. Thank you for being exactly who you are. James stood to shake her hand. Thank you, Mrs. Williams, for everything. After the passengers deplaned, James gathered his materials and prepared to face whatever waited beyond the aircraft. Media, corporate communications, the fallout from a video that was apparently being seen by millions. He descended the jetway to find a crowd of Delta employees, gate agents, ramp workers, other pilots, waiting with applause. Signs reading, "We stand with Captain Mitchell," and "Professionalism over prejudice." The support was overwhelming and unexpected, and James felt his composure finally crack slightly. Marcus Thompson, the Atlanta security officer who'd witnessed the original incident, had flown to Los Angeles on an earlier flight specifically to be there. Captain Mitchell, wanted to make sure you knew you had support out here. You flew here just for this. Some things are worth the trip. What you handled today, both in Atlanta and on that flight, that's leadership, that's character. That's what we need more of. Sarah from the Atlanta Sky Club was there too, having taken a later flight. Captain, I'm so sorry I didn't shut that down faster. I should have. You did everything right, James interrupted. This isn't on you. This is on people who make assumptions and the systems that enable those assumptions. A woman in a sharp business suit approached. Captain Mitchell, I'm Jennifer Walsh, Delta's VP of Corporate Communications. Do you have a few minutes to talk? They found a quiet office in the terminal. Jennifer pulled up her tablet showing the viral video's reach. Over 8 million views now across all platforms. Network news covering it. International outlets picking it up. The incident had become a flashpoint for discussions about racism, assumptions, and who belongs where. Captain, we want to make sure you're supported through this, Jennifer said. The company stands behind you completely. CEO Bastian wants that message to be crystal clear. We're also using this as an opportunity to address our own diversity and inclusion practices. I just want to fly planes, James said quietly. I never wanted to be a symbol or a news story. I understand, but symbols matter. You handled an incredibly difficult situation with grace and professionalism. That matters to people. Black pilots, Black professionals, anyone who's been told they don't belong somewhere, they absolutely do belong. They're seeing themselves in you right now. James rubbed his face. What happens next? That's up to you. We can arrange media interviews if you're willing, or we can release a statement on your behalf and ask media to respect your privacy. It's your choice. I need time to think. Take all the time you need. You've got a 3-day layover in Los Angeles. Hotels arranged. Companies covering everything. Reach out when you're ready. That evening, alone in his hotel room, James finally let himself fully process what had happened. The video played on his laptop. The moment that had been humiliating and personal was now public entertainment and social commentary. The comments section was a war zone. Thousands of messages supporting him, praising his professionalism, condemning Richard Morrison, but also the predictable ugliness. People defending Morrison's actions, questioning James's credentials, making racist comments disguised as concerns about hiring practices and affirmative action. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Text messages from fellow pilots, former colleagues, friends from college, people he hadn't spoken to in years, all offering support, sharing their own stories, thanking him for handling it with dignity. One text stood out from his mentor, Captain Robert Chen, who'd trained James 20 years ago. Jim, you made that look easy, but I know it wasn't. You represented every Black pilot who came before you and everyone coming after. Your father would be proud. I'm proud. Fly safe. James looked at his father's old leather jacket hanging in the hotel closet. Air Force pilot. Tuskegee Airman legacy. A man who'd faced worse racism than James encountered today and still flew with excellence and courage. I hope I made you proud, Dad, James whispered to the empty room. His phone rang. Unknown number, but something made him answer. Captain Mitchell? This is Dorothy Williams. I hope you don't mind. I got your number from Denise. I wanted to check on you. Mrs. Williams, I'm fine. Thank you for calling. I wanted to tell you something my husband told me years ago. He said that every time he flew, he was flying for every Black person who'd been told they couldn't, shouldn't, or wouldn't ever get to do what he was doing. He said it was a responsibility, but also an honor. You carried that today, Captain. You flew for all of us. After the call, James stood at the hotel window looking out at Los Angeles stretched beneath him. Millions of people in this city alone, millions more across the country. How many of them had been told they didn't belong? How many had been judged by their appearance rather than their capabilities? He'd become a symbol when he only wanted to be a pilot. But maybe Dorothy was right. Maybe symbols mattered. Maybe his 20 years of safe flights and professional excellence could mean something beyond just doing his job well. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Ed Bastian, Delta's CEO. Captain Mitchell, Ed Bastian. First, I want to personally apologize that you experienced that situation. It should never have happened. Second, I want you to know the company stands behind you completely. And third, I'd like to discuss how we can use this moment to improve things. Not just at Delta, but across the industry. They talked for 30 minutes. About diversity in aviation. About the barriers Black pilots still faced. About the assumptions passengers and employees sometimes made. About how Delta could lead the industry in addressing these issues head-on, rather than pretending they didn't exist. Captain, would you be willing to work with us on this? Ed asked. Lead a task force on diversity and inclusion in flight operations? Use your voice and experience to make actual changes? James thought about Richard Morrison losing his job, about the millions of people watching the video, about Dorothy's husband and the Tuskegee Airmen and his own father, about every black pilot who'd come before him and everyone who'd come after. Yes, he said, I'll do it. The next morning, James gave his first interview to a major news network. Sitting across from the reporter in Delta's Los Angeles offices, he told his story, not just about the Sky Club incident, but about his 20-year career, the subtle and not-so-subtle racism he'd faced, the passengers who'd questioned whether he was really the captain, the assumptions that followed him despite his credentials and experience. What do you want people to understand from what happened? The reporter asked. James chose his words carefully. I want people to understand that competence doesn't look one way. Excellence comes in every color. When you make assumptions about someone based on their appearance, their race, their clothing, whatever, you're not just being rude. You're potentially denying someone their rights, their opportunities, their dignity. Mr. Morrison tried to have me removed from a lounge I belonged in. If I'd been white and dressed the same way, I guarantee that doesn't happen. Richard Morrison lost his job over this incident. Do you feel any responsibility for that? I feel no responsibility for his consequences. I feel responsibility for the 247 passengers I flew safely from Atlanta to Los Angeles despite being humiliated an hour before takeoff. Mr. Morrison made choices. Those choices had consequences. That's not on me. The interview went viral, too. Clips shared across every platform. James's words about competence and assumptions and responsibility resonating with millions of people who'd experienced similar judgment. 3 days later, James flew back to Atlanta to begin his work with Delta's new diversity task force. The first meeting included pilots, flight attendants, ground crew, executives, a cross-section of the company's entire operation. Here's what we're going to do, James said, standing at the head of the conference table. We're going to examine every policy, every practice, every assumption that might create barriers for people of color in this company. We're going to create real accountability for discrimination. We're going to train every employee on recognizing and addressing bias. And we're going to make Delta the model for how airlines should handle these issues. Over the following months, the changes were real and substantial. Mandatory bias training for all employees, revised complaint procedures with third-party review, increased recruitment efforts at historically black colleges, mentorship programs for pilots of color, clear consequences for discriminatory behavior from employees or passengers. James returned to flying, but now he was also a voice for change. He spoke at aviation conferences, wrote articles for industry publications, appeared on panels about diversity in STEM fields. The worn leather jacket his father gave him remained his pre-flight constant, a reminder of the legacy he carried and the future he was helping build. Richard Morrison's story took a different path. Fired from his job, marriage strained to breaking by his public humiliation. Social circle evaporated. The video of his behavior now defined him in every Google search of his name. 6 months after the incident, Richard did something unexpected. He reached out through Delta Corporate Communications requesting permission to speak with James. They met in a coffee shop in Atlanta. Richard looked smaller somehow, defeated in a way that went beyond losing his job and social standing. Captain Mitchell, I know I don't deserve your time, but I needed to apologize face to face. Not for the cameras, not for social media, just person to person. James sat across from him, waiting. I was wrong, Richard continued, about everything. I made assumptions based purely on your race and how you were dressed. I tried to humiliate you and destroy your credibility based on nothing but prejudice. I was everything the video shows me to be, a racist who thought he had the right to decide who belonged where based on what they looked like. He paused, his hands shaking around his coffee cup. I lost everything. My job, my reputation, most of my friends. My wife left me. Our kids won't speak to me. And honestly, I deserved all of it. Because what I did to you was horrible. And the worst part is, you weren't the first. You were just the first time I got caught and couldn't make excuses. James listened, his expression neutral. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Richard said. I'm not asking you to make a public statement supporting me or saying I've changed. I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to hear from me directly that I was wrong, that I'm sorry, and that I'm trying, really trying, to be better than I was that day. What does trying to be better look like? James asked. I'm in therapy, working through why I thought and acted the way I did. I'm volunteering with organizations that address racial justice. I'm reading, learning, listening to perspectives I never bothered with before. I'm trying to understand the harm I caused. Not just to you, but to everyone I've treated this way over my entire life. Richard looked directly at James. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know that what happened that day, it broke something in me, something that needed to be broken. I was a terrible person who thought he was a good person. Now I'm trying to become someone who's actually good instead of just thinking I am. James sat with that for a moment. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate you saying this, but my forgiveness isn't what you need. You need to continue the work you're describing. Not for me, not for your image, but because it's right. The fact that you lost everything isn't a tragedy. It's accountability. The question is what you build from here. I understand, Richard said quietly. They didn't shake hands. James left that coffee shop uncertain if Richard Morrison would actually continue his work or if this was just another performance. But the man had shown up, owned his actions, and seemed genuinely broken by the consequences of his racism. That was more than most people managed. A year after the Sky Club incident, James stood in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. The museum was hosting an exhibition on diversity in aviation, and James's story, along with his father's leather jacket, had been included. The exhibit featured the Tuskegee Airmen, the first black military pilots. It highlighted pioneers like Bessie Coleman, the first black woman pilot. It showcased modern black aviators who'd broken barriers and opened doors, and it included a section on contemporary challenges, featuring the viral video of James's encounter with Richard Morrison. James stood in front of that display, feeling the weight of history. The pilots who'd come before him had faced worse. Legally sanctioned discrimination, death threats, violence. He'd faced assumptions and prejudice, serious but survivable. He was standing on the shoulders of giants who'd fought harder battles so he could fly at all. Dad, look, it's Captain Mitchell from the video. A young black boy, maybe 10 years old, tugged his father's hand and pointed at James standing near the exhibit. The father approached respectfully. Captain Mitchell, I'm sorry to bother you, but my son Marcus has been watching your interview about 100 times. He says he wants to be a pilot like you. James knelt down to the boy's eye level. You want to be a pilot, Marcus? Yes, sir. I want to fly 707-7s just like you. Then study hard, math and science especially. Stay curious, ask questions, work harder than everyone else, and never, never let anyone tell you that you don't belong somewhere you've earned the right to be. Like that mean man in the video? Exactly like him. Some people will make assumptions about you based on how you look. Your job is to be so good at what you do that those assumptions become impossible to maintain. The boy's father had tears in his eyes. Thank you, Captain. You have no idea what it means to him, to both of us, to see someone who looks like us doing what you do. After they left, James stood in front of his father's leather jacket displayed in the museum case. The worn leather that had flown combat missions in Vietnam. That had been passed down with pride and expectation. That had witnessed 20 years of James's career and would witness however many more years he had left in aviation. His phone buzzed. Text from Andrea Stevens, his co-pilot. Just got assigned to your next flight. 777 to London. Ready to fly with the most famous pilot in America? James smiled and typed back. Ready to fly with an excellent co-pilot. That's all that matters. Because at the end of the day, despite viral videos and task forces and museum exhibits, James Mitchell was and would always be a pilot. Someone who loved flying more than he hated the obstacles thrown in his path. Someone who did his job with excellence, regardless of who recognized or appreciated that excellence. The Sky Club incident had changed his life in ways he never wanted, but it also gave him a platform to change things for pilots who came after him, to create accountability where none existed, to transform one moment of humiliation into lasting institutional change. Richard Morrison had tried to kick a black man out of an airport lounge, assuming he didn't belong. Instead, he'd elevated that man's voice and destroyed his own career. The businessman learned that assumptions have consequences when they target someone with the competence and character to expose them. And Captain James Mitchell kept flying, kept leading, kept being exactly who he'd always been. An excellent pilot who happened to be black, wearing his father's jacket, carrying the legacy of everyone who'd fought so he could sit in that left seat and guide planes safely across the sky. Have you ever witnessed instant karma this perfect? A businessman tried to remove a black man from an airport lounge based on pure racist assumptions, then discovered he'd insulted the pilot who would be flying his plane. This story exposes how prejudice operates in spaces that claim to be professional and inclusive, how assumptions about who belongs where can backfire spectacularly, and how one pilot's grace under pressure sparked real change across an entire industry. If you believe in judging people by their competence rather than their appearance, if this story of dignity triumphing over discrimination moved you, if you want to see more accounts of excellence exposing prejudice, subscribe right now. Share this with someone who needs to understand that assumptions based on race can have serious consequences. Comment below about experiences you've witnessed where someone was judged unfairly based on how they looked rather than who they were. These stories happen every day in airports, offices, stores across America, and they need to be told, shared, and learned from. Your engagement spreads the message that competence comes in every color, that excellence deserves recognition regardless of race, and that the people we underestimate often turn out to be the most qualified in the room. Hit subscribe, share this video, leave your thoughts below, because your voice matters in fighting for equity in every profession, every space, every interaction where prejudice tries to determine who belongs and who doesn't. Truth always rises, justice always comes, and sometimes karma is a 737 at 35,000 feet.